Welcome back. We're going to, B'ez Hashem, look forward to conclude this part of the Igeres Yutes. Yutes is divided into two. On the overall, we mentioned many times, it's rare in the entire Sefer Tanya, in all five segments, that a chapter or a letter in the Igeres HaKodesh, as an example, that it should be divided into two segments. It's not really two segments, just even that it should be divided into two paragraphs, if you will. In the, for example, Likutei Amorim, the first segment, there's, I believe, 4 prakim out of 53. The Alter Rebbe divides it into two, and of course, this is with much precision, like everything else in Tanya, is with maximum, unimaginable precision. We mentioned the story many times. At the beginning of Perek Mimalot, the Alter Rebbe sat 6 weeks if to write Ikra v'Sharsha or Ve'ikra v'Sharsha. Now, you just to understand the Alter Rebbe's mind, this is not even on a particular spiritual level of a tzaddik and a great man connected to. Of course, everything is ultimately interconnected, but nonetheless, you don't have to go particularly from that angle. The mind of the Alter Rebbe, you say 6 weeks, like an average person, it's probably much more than 6 years. It's not hyperbole. Alter Rebbe's mind was unique and distinct, and every second of the Alter Rebbe and every second of concentration carried a lot of weight and a lot of information. And the Alter Rebbe himself pointed out that every single, the way he wrote the Sefer Tanya, he wrote that every word that he wrote, maybe I think even a letter, if I'm not mistaken, that he thought through the entire Sefer, and that's the way he proceeded, another letter, and then the entire Sefer again. Now, how do you do that? If you're probably writing in a regular pace, but the Alter Rebbe, as he was writing in a regular pace, was able to think through the entire Sefer Likutei Amorim. As an example, even Likutei Amorim, as he was writing and progressing with the messages of the Tanya, in this case Likutei Amorim, which when we say Tanya, on the overall, we spoke about this quite a few times. We say predominantly is Likutei Amorim, but in the end of the day, it's the entire Sefer Tanya, which is part of the overall message, divided into 5 segments. We mentioned this so many times. Tzemach Tzedek pointed out this is itself, the 5 is also with maximum precision. This is the Teireh Shebiksav of Teireh Sachsidus known. Thus, the 5 segments, but at the end of the day, of course, each segment contributes to the other. Likutei Amorim, which is the manual to our Avodas Hashem, we mentioned so many times, the perfect manual to our Avodas Hashem as service to our Creator, but Shaykh B'Emunah, which is about Achdus Hashem, oneness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, of course, it contributes to one's serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that awareness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, of Hashem, to whom we're serving, comes across Shaykh B'Emunah. Then he gets a tshuva. The person has the ability to realign himself with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is the idea of tshuva, and how it's explained and presented so uniquely by the Alter Rebbe, like no other presentation. Get us a tshuva of the Alter Rebbe. There's like no other presentation. It doesn't exist. Like Shaykh B'Emunah. One has to learn it themselves. Now, for that matter, we concluded all the first 3 segments, Likutei Amorim, Shaykh B'Emunah, and Igeres HaTshuva. Then Igeres HaKodesh, we're holding in the 19th Holy Epistle of the Alter Rebbe, which is the 4th segment. Even in Igeres HaKodesh, so many ideas explained. We pointed out, for example, in Tezvav, Igeres HaKodesh, the Alter Rebbe elaborates on the 3 cognitive faculties, in other words, in the overall, the 10 spheres, the 10 faculties which exist with every human being, and particularly the Yid. Yid has the Nefesh Elokisa and the Nefesh Bahamis, which are the 3 cognitive faculties. And then the 7 emotions, which he mentions so many times throughout the entire Likutei Amorim, but never elaborates one by one how it exactly develops, how it evolves from seichel, from intellect, into emotion, and each one of them with different examples, parables, till he brings it over in the relationship with the Yid with the Kodesh Baruch Hu. This elaboration, and for example, this area, which is such a fundamental idea of the 10 spheres, to know them thoroughly, to understand each midah, each character, each attribute, in detail and with specificity in its style, what it's all about, the character itself and how it's expressed and how it works in interaction and relationship with one party and another. And Alter Rebbe's example, master and pupil, the father and son, and then eventually between HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Am Yisrael. And this doesn't exist in the whole, this expansive presentation regarding the 10 faculties doesn't exist in Likutei Amarim. It's spoken about throughout, but with such detail. So even you found Yigeres HaKodesh, so many ideas in Yigeres HaKodesh contribute to the grander image of Sefer Tanya. Yigeres HaKodesh on its own, of course, is distinct. Its letters. We spoke about this so many times. We had a full presentation at the beginning of Yud in Yigeres HaKodesh, which is 9 back. And wherever you're watching this limud, there is the original website. These classes, that is, there's the original website is the TanyaOnline.com, TanyaOnline, one word.com, where you have all the classes lined up, for that matter, from the very beginning. Likutei Amarim, Sheikha B'Emuna, Yigeres HaTshuva, which we were Zeicha, B'Chazdei Hashem, to learn together, to conclude those segments, and Yigeres HaKodesh up to the 19th. It's all lined up from top to bottom. So, that, for example, this, I believe, is the 7th class in Yigeres HaKodesh, in Yutes, in this epistle, and so all the previous classes up till this very class are on the top. In other words, from top to bottom, so they're even easier to access. But then again, all the classes just really a click. You scroll down from the very beginning, Likutei Amarim. And Alter Rebbe himself, as we mentioned so many times, cross-references from one chapter to the other, even one time one Yigeres to the other, or one segment to the other, like I explained there. And instead of taking the time to explain it, even explain it presently in brief, to understand the present study, but to understand it thoroughly with greater detail and articulation, just go back. It's a click away to go back to that chapter where Alter Rebbe sent you to. And as we mentioned, we cross-reference many times in areas which we took a lot of time to explain certain ideas. So we explain it just to understand the present study. But in order to thoroughly understand, we point out that in this chapter from the very beginning, it's explained in elaboration. We took the time then to explain and with much detail. So it's really all integrated, and the ability to access all the classes, of course, which can contribute to the overall understanding of the Holy Sefer Tanya. So that's TanyaOnline.com. In this very last Yigeres, so we pointed out as well in the beginning. Last week, I think we spoke about it. We do mention periodically that Yigeres HaKodesh, by definition, this is Yigeres written. It's different than the first 3 segments. In fact, the first 3 segments are one idea. Every perek follows the other. They're sequential. As opposed to Yigeres, letters written at different times, different communities addressing different ideas. So even though there's in Yigeres HaKodesh, we mention this all the time, that there is that mitzvah of tzedakah, which definitely comes through the whole segment of Yigeres HaKodesh, but not necessarily does it mean that every chapter has this mitzvah. As an example, even this very chapter, Eiter Kasalma, I don't even know if in the whole chapter, the mitzvah of tzedakah is mentioned even once, as in other chapters. So Alter Rebbe speaks about certain ones, addresses the limud Torah, the idea of tefillah b'tzibur, Sachin as an example. Being careful with davening, and then in the original, the first chapter, you have a few ideas, the idea of siyum hashas, and the idea of tzedakah, and the idea siyum hashas, and the idea of davening. Alter Rebbe puts a great emphasis on the avodas tefillah, which he overall did. And he felt that this is one of the more important studies or appreciation of this very notion of avodas hatefillah, which he learned by the Mizrich Magid, which was the reason why he went to Mizrich. And you have it a lot in these Yigeres HaKodesh, the idea, the significance of davening to the extent in that first chapter, the first Yigeres, first letter, is the Yom Yiddushun Hashem. A person should never skip a day to invest in avodas hatefillah. We're not talking about lips saying the words. Of course, we daven shachar mincha, but the avodas hatefillah, the sweet avodas hatefillah, a person should not let even one davening go through Yom Yiddushun Hashem. As an example, the very first chapter, and comes down very strong. As an example, so Igeres HaKodesh is definitely distinct. It is Igeres, letters, as opposed to the first three segments. And so we had this whole presentation. There's a backdrop also with Mendel Hodedoker and his Chassidim, which made the Aliyah to Eretz HaKodesh. We had this whole backdrop in the this 10th. Again, we say this to the newcomers, 9 back in the first class, TanyaOnline.com. So we continue over here. If you recall, Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'hakol nהיה b'dvarei. So if you recall, last week's presentation, last week's study, the Rebbe speaks about this idea that Moshe Rabbeinu poneh le'yiro b'bereisus hacheirai. So we had the idea of bereisus hacheirai. The Rebbe explains that Moshe Rabbeinu was able to see Netzach Yisei Malchus as opposed to the Pnimis of the Midas Chesed and Gvura Tiferes. He only had the bereisus hacheirai. We asked why is there a cheirai there, not Netzach Yisei Malchus. We said Netzach Yisei Malchus is all about the way that the midah is expressed, the about face, meaning to say there's the sensation of the midah and the execution of the midah. The execution of the midah is the Netzach Yisei Malchus. Therefore, he had a habot of pnimis. He had a pnimisic connection to this Netzach Yisei Malchus, despite on the overall poneh le'yiro. But this is not poneh, the sensation of the midah. This is the achiraim of the midah. This is the execution of the midah. Again, you got to see the previous classes. But in the overall, there was the poneh le'yiro. Anything in a shaychus to pnimius le'yiro, as opposed to the v'ra'isa as acheirai. That anything that had to do with the about face, anything to do with the execution or the external dimension of these midas, of these ashpois, of these spheres, of these expressions of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Moshe Rabbeinu did have. It had it in a way of re'iyah. If you remember, the Alter Rebbe underscored it. It's not just like a general understanding and appreciation and deep, profound knowledge and perception. This is re'iyah. This is vision, sensual. Excuse me, a vision, in other words, not like when you see a table. It's mamish. There's the table, the tangible table is in front of you. In this case, what does Moshe Rabbeinu see? It's not something tangible. It's sensory. Is, of course, he had a sensory vision on this level of acheirai, but vision no less. This is seeing, the conviction of seeing, the conviction of re'iyah. There's nothing like it. That's what we explained, that eined nasa dayan. According to Allah, a witness can never be a judge, because a judge has to be objective to see both sides. When you see something, you're never going to see another side to the story. You saw it. Moshe Rabbeinu had the re'iyah ne'lakus. We explained this and underscored this in the previous classes on this very chapter, in these very Igeres. But what was it, the acheirai? So, again, you got to see all these classes. This is the 7th class on this Igeres. So the Alter Rebbe speaks about the whole idea that Moshe Rabbeinu should zocha shetinos Torah al yodei. As it says, that Moshe Rabbeinu, what was Moshe Rabbeinu's name, namely his mandate, is to be the kibbutz mikabel Torah misina, to give over Torah to Am Yisrael. That's what Moshe Rabbeinu was about Torah. Of course, he had to lead up to Torah, taking out mitzvah. But even by the sneh, by the burning bush, Hashem told Moshe Rabbeinu, of course, there is the exodus of Egypt, leaving Mitzrayim, which is a prerequisite in order to receive Torah on all levels. Physical, you have to leave Mitzrayim in order to get to Har Sinai. If you're bonded in Mitzrayim, and you're slaves in Egypt, so you're not crossing the threshold of Egypt to go to Har Sinai to get the Torah. But of course, there's so many different meanings, different layers to it. You can't be in Egypt. You can't be involved with Egyptian culture. Tumas Mitzrayim, the impurity of Mitzrayim, in order to receive the Torah. Therefore, there was the 49 days. You had to purify themselves. Hashem didn't give the Torah right after they came out of Mitzrayim, or even right after Kriyas Yamsuf. It wasn't the day after Kriyas Yamsuf. Okay, we're giving the Torah. No, you didn't have to get rid of. Right? The Yidden were taken out of Mitzrayim. The Yidden had to work on themselves to get to Mitzrayim, to rid Mitzrayim from themselves, in order to receive the Torah. But what is the ultimate goal? So you didn't have to leave Mitzrayim. Leave Yidden out of Mitzrayim. There's the miracles in the Mitzrayim that itself, of taking Yidden out of Mitzrayim, the miracles Hashem performed, that itself makes an impact, an imprint on Mitzrayim, and the overall, the way Mitzrayim represents the civilized world. The Elam Hazik is a dosage of Shem Hashem, even Yod Mitzrayim Keni Hashem. Of course, that's something very grand, which is a upgrade. Usually it's Bereshis Bara Lekim as Hashemayim Zaretz, Hashemayim, heaven and earth, and everything in between. The entire creation is connected to Shem Lekim. And here Hashem opens up a new window of Shem Hashem, which is the beginning of Parshas Va'era, which Hashem says to Moshe Rabbeinu, now I am going to reveal the Shem Hashem, which I didn't even reveal to the obvious Avraham Yitzchak Yaakov, the Holy of Holies. Holies of Holies. Avraham Yitzchak Yaakov, our forefathers, didn't have that connection or that entry into Shem Havaya, Shem Havaya Loinei Daitilim. And now the Eibishter opens up that Shem Havaya, which it comes through it's manifest via the miracles Hashem performs in Mitzrayim. And even Mitzrayim Yedikuni Hashem, which is stupendous, grand on its own. The idea of Yetzias Mitzrayim. And of course this idea that allowing Yidden to leave the Egyptian bondage, the Egyptian impact, the influence of Egypt. They try to make us like them. Tumas Mitzrayim, the memory of Shari Tuma, which we know, we speak about throughout, mentioned so many times, Sav, Tumas Mitzrayim, and Ervas Mitzrayim, and then the immersion of that, to leave that behind, because we are Mamlechas Kerim Kodesh, we're holy, we're great priests, we are kings, we have kingship within ourselves. So with the Melech Malchem Makadosh Baruch Hu, we belong to Hashem. Ki li b'nei Yisrael avadei avod daihem. So they have to leave Mitzrayim. They don't more Abdei Parei. That's what Yitzis Mitzrayim was all about. It was something grand and stupendous on its own. Of course it was. But nonetheless, there was an objective. The Eibusha told Moshe Rabbeinu in the very beginning, when he took Yidden out of Mitzrayim, that there's a goal, there's an objective. What is there's a means. This is, in the end of the day, from a certain perspective and point of view, we can't say it's just a means to an end. There's something so grand of Yetzias Mitzrayim, the exodus of Egypt, and as long as we just spoken, and we just, even a few ideas here presented, but in the grander scheme, yes, it's a means to an end. To serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu on this mountain, which is Har Sinai, to receive the Torah. Aseres HaDibra is the revelation. Mount Sinai revelation. Ma'amid Har Sinai. Anoichi Hashem Elokecha. Ponim beponim Dibra Hashem Elokecha. They spoke face to face with Am Yisrael. Paruch Nishmason, to that degree. This was the greatest revelation of all time. It says Matan Torah will never happen again. Mashiach will come. Then we will have a similar Gili, a similar revelation. Then it was Atore Soladas. As Rashi says, he broke through. She already came in order. Yidden stood face to face with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And then they received the Torah, which in the Torah is where Hashem Anechi, Hashem Lekecha, as the Gemara says, Anechi, every idea in Torah, every concept in Torah. Every word of Torah is part of the Anechi. Hashem placed himself in Torah. That whole revelation of Matan Torah, starting from the Anechi Hashem Melikecha, the first one of the Aseres HaDibros, really exists in every word in Torah. He learns thereafter. And there's so much more to Matan Torah. I mean, Matan Torah was the ultimate goal of Yetzias Mitzrayim, and the peak of the experience and the relationship of Yisrael with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That was it. Ato harei soladas. You expose yourself. Lodas, he had an inner, intimate knowledge. Ki Hashem hu elikim and eid milvadei. This is Matan Torah. Who has the mandate to give Torah to Am Yisrael? That's Moshe Rabbeinu. And not only that, Moshe Rabbeinu, Gemara says, Maser Nafshi Allah, he gave his life over the Torah, and if Nikras al Shmei, it's called over Moshe Rabbeinu's name. Moshe is Torah, and Torah is Moshe. That's the main idea. Moshe Kibbutz Torah Messina. And his son, he passed it on, Yeshua, and eventually to every single year. So the Alter Rebbe, if you remember, connects this idea that Moshe Rabbeinu brings Torah down Lamata to this idea, but he says Achayrai. And he's explained that, very briefly, if you remember, that examples a cup. There's the pnimis of the cup, that it's mikabel, it receives calmly. It's just one with the cup becomes one with this which it contains. That's the main thing of the cup, the pneumius of the cup. And then this very cup could be expressed bichitzeini, in a chitzeini, meaning to say that it takes this which it has and it passes on. It's to another party. Even the person himself drinks. You're taking from the inside, which this is the ikar idea of the keli. It's pnimius, it's inside, basically. Insideness, no such a word, but the idea that it's the pnimius of the keli, it's the container, and then in its common with the cup and the content of what the cup holds is just the most natural state of the keli, of the cup as an example. But then the person takes the cup, and of course this is ultimately the objective of a cup, to pass on to others, to drink, but that's already the chitzenius, that you're taking this and extending it to another party or even to yourself. We explained this a little more more detail. If you recall, last week we spoke about this. So this is the achiraim, the about faces, when you take it and it has to go elsewhere, be expressed and actualized, and removed from the way it is bipnimiusai, and to be actualized and executed bichitzeniusai. Or this is the chitzenius of it, the fact that it goes away from its pnimius and it ends up to an area which it's meant to connect to, but again, out of its pnimius, in the area of chitzenius. Now, when it came to Torah, which is I call idea of Moshe Rabbeinu, the whole idea of Torah is not that it should remain the pnimius. The whole idea of Torah is that it should come down, lamata mata to elam hazagashmi, and to make an impact, an imprint in elam hazagashmi, which is a significant majority of the mitzvahs, which is to connect to elam haza. You take tefillin, for example, it's the hide of the animal. The ink comes from a tree. And this becomes the mitzvah of tefillin. It's a physical box, physical parchment. But why does it always have to touch down to the physical? Why can't Torah be metaphysical or spiritual? It has to connect us somehow. I mean, it's touching down by the fact that it's given to people living in Elam Hazah. But why the significant majority of the mitzvahs? Truma, Maiseres, Mezuzah, Pesach, Sukkot, those boards, those schach, the matzah that we eat, the mezuzah on the door, the tefillin that we wear. Everything is connected to Elam Hazeh Gashmi. Answer, that's what Torah is all about. Torah is not that it remains bipnimius, which is explained to the Chochmah B'Kodesh Baruch Hu, the Kechma, its most natural state, that it's miyuchad b'matzil, it's one with its emanator. But Torah says, no, we're going place. We're coming down here. We're taking the cup and we're pouring it out. It's the chitzenius, the external dimension of the expression of it being contained and one with the container, which in this case the chokhmah with b'ma'atzila, with its emanator. No, it's going now down to Elam Hazeh, go through the Seder Shtalshlus, down into Elam Hazeh, and making an impact, an imprint in Elam Hazeh Tach and Shem Tach L'Mata. And then there's nothing lower than Elam Hazeh, as we know, and it's part of the grander scheme of Nizav HaKadosh Baruch Hu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted a dwelling place in this very physical world. So this is what Torah is. The Alter Rebbe connected, by extension, connected. That's what V'ra'isa Sachirai, because Moshe Rabbeinu is connected to the Achirai, meaning to say to the about face of this level of Chochmah, the core energy of Chochmah, which is Miyuchad B'Matzil, one with its emanator, one with Hashem, and it goes away from that state and it turns towards the outer state, the state that it's going to be executed and expressed, rather, and implemented out in Elam Hazeh. That's the Chirayim, and that's what Torah is all about. You can't just stand with the Torah and saying, I'm no, even Torah in comparison to the mitzvahs, which Alter Rebbe is going to quote today, and this is the end of the first part over here, which we mentioned again. This is, I say, the first part, very rare. We started with that in the fourth, this Likutei Amorim. There's four areas, four chapters where the Alter Rebbe has two paragraphs, and even later also it's a rarity. But we'll understand why. We pointed out, actually, then, if you recall, when we learned those chapters, we try to give our own b'derech efsher, and maybe this is the reason why because again, everything in Tanya is with a maximum, unimaginable precision, unimaginable, literally. So why without Teda divide those? We try to, put a little bit of our, at least to try we're able to. If it's emes, it made sense, at least when we think it makes sense. Why Dal Tereba, for example, Yud Dal, why would you divide? But again, if you learn Yud Dal, you understand what Dal Tereba is adding in the second part, which is very distinct and different than the first. So perhaps that was the reason why I broke it apart. And in this case also, we'll try to give a little bit of, maybe a little understanding, because here it's maybe even easier why Dal Tereba divided this. So towards the end, just back to the message over here, that this is what Torah is all about. And therefore, by Moshe Rabbeinu it says, "V'ra'isa sachayra," because Moshe Rabbeinu zacha shetinosum Torah al yada, and Torah is all about coming down and telling him has again being part of the grander scheme of the L'saber Kodesh Baruch Hu L'sleitir B'tachteinu. Kodesh Baruch Hu wanted it abode down here in this physical world through the Torah, and it's all about the execution, the implementation, the realizing Torah. Even regarding Torah and mitzvahs. Torah is more a study, mitzvahs is more hands-on, associated directly with Elam Hazak Gashmi. And someone's going to say, oh, I see the bigger picture, but I want just the Torah without the mitzvahs. I don't want to do the mitzvahs, get involved in the details. And what's with the details? And the answer is, Hashem wants it exactly like that. And it's all about the details. But I want to learn, get rid and become connected to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Even through Torah, which by definition, Torah is a greater union with HaKadosh Baruch Hu than a Yid unites through mitzvahs, by definition. But nonetheless, someone says, as we're going to learn today, I only want the Torah, I feel the Torah, and like, no, you don't have Torah, because you're missing the point. HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants it dafka to be expressed b'chitzenius. But he says, that's what Moshe Rabbeinu is all about, to take the Torah and make it real dafka ne'lamazeh hakashmi. So on the onset, what we learned till now is till this piece over here, which concludes this paragraph, this segment or this part of this Igeres, is that the whole idea of Torah is that it should touch down into Elam Hazeh, and not the disconnect, or this which is separate from the Maisa, separate from the implementation, or the great emphasis on implementing Torah down here Lamata. And someone's going to say, I know that Hashem gave us a Torah. It speaks about a lot of Maisa, and I open a Gemara, Shnai Mechzim Matal is the significant majority of Torah. It's all about the Elam Hazeh. I know that it exists, but I'd rather sit on a mountaintop and meditate with, of course, godly meditations, and tell HaKadosh Baruch Hu how much I love Him. The boxes on my hands, I'll do it maybe when I go to a bar mitzvah or something. What's with the boxes on my hands? What's that parchment on the door? It seems just symbolic, and I'd rather just have a real and intense and sensational relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. No, that's not a relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's a relationship with your ideas, the way you fabricated what a relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu is. HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave a Torah, and He says, I wanted a main idea of Torah. Yeah, is there time for meditation? Yeah, that's called Avodas HaTfilah. Avodah of prayer. Of course, there's time for that as well. But what's the Ikar idea of Torah is to implement it with all its details. And its most nuanced details are part of the grander Rotzen of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that it's going to meant to be exactly like that. Maybe in Loisas, and less of the negative mitzvahs and the positive mitzvahs. Hashem says, wait 6 hours. 6 hours is not 5 hours and 55 minutes. And it's not even 5 hours and 59 minutes. There's precision. Everything is by design. It's more than by design. This is what HaKadosh Baruch Hu's core is expressed in that mitzvah, with all those details of the mitzvah. And then the tefillin has to be, especially by Rashi, straight in the middle of the head, middle of the tefillin has to be exactly equal. And the box has to face the heart. And exactly the tzuras and fingertips. There's so many details, and that's what the Ratzon Hashem is. The whole Ratzon Hashem is doing it, even if you never go on a mountaintop and invest in that meditation, God, I love you, and you just do what Hashem wants. That's when you're really connected to Hashem. Because that's what Hashem wants. Is He calls the shots how you're going to be connected to me. The whole idea of a creation, to be created, to create Torahs, and oxymoron. It just doesn't begin to make sense. But that's what Hashem. That's what Hashem gave us. That's the unique advantage and merit, an accolade which exists inherently in Torah, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, through Torah, made the connection between Creator and creation. It's a nasan, it's a matana. You can connect to me. Put on the tefillin. And because it's the whole chidush, it's a novelty. So therefore it ought to be done with exact rules of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is established that he could connect with his creation. He could connect with human beings, he could connect with the Yid. So it has to be precisely done the way he told us to connect, the way that we're going to connect to him. Not our own styles, ideas, even noble ideas, holy ideas. True Kedusha is in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu decided that the Torah and mitzvahs are going to be learned and performed exactly in that way. That's the way they're meant to be performed, with all the details which Torah Shabbat Peh, of course, elaborates on this, which Hashem writes a little more in general in Torah Shabbat, the written Torah Shabbat Peh, which is all one Torah. It's one Torah. It's written with brevity, succinctly. In Torah Shabbat Peh is with elaboration, but it tells you exactly all the details of that mitzvah. For example, this mitzvah tefillin. Torah is very, very succinct in Torah Shabbat. And look at the mitzvah tefillin. There's hundreds of details to be able to put together a pair of tefillin and eventually put it on and with all the details where it's meant to go and all the details which we know about the pair of tefillin, how it's actually written and so on. This is the Torah Shabbat Peh, but it's all one Torah. This is what Hashem has in mind. So we have to do it again on his basis, not on our basis, which is all about Torah details, and the details, the way it's connected to Elam HaMaaseh. That's what Torah is all about. But the Rebbe adds over here, someone says, I want to learn Torah, because I know that even part of the package of Torah mitzvahs, Hashem wants us to learn Torah. And that's also his desire. And that's one of his greatest desires. And by definition, as the Rebbe famously has, these few chapters in Tanya, the Rebbe underscores that the true union, or the greatest, not true, mitzvahs, so we Yid's connected, united with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, with a absolute union. Yet you can never compare the union a Yid with HaKadosh Baruch Hu when he learns Torah, when he does mitzvahs, meaning to say that it's the true union with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, or both true. Let's say this again. It's the most deepest union a Yid could unite with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And by far, in case, there's no comparison to doing the mitzvah, uniting with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the mitzvah, or uniting with HaKadosh Baruch Hu through Limudat Torah. This is HaKadosh Baruch Hu telling us with Talmud Torah Kineged Kulam, because when you learn Torah, the union is with me, with Hashem, says Hashem, that it's a total different level. And this is the way it is from the perspective of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So the Alter Rebbe adds over here is that someone's going to say, okay, to me to say that I'm going to go on this mountaintop as an example, it doesn't say this in the previous class, but just to compare what the Alter Rebbe is adding over here, or he points out over here in today's study, is there we gave the example that someone's going to go on this mountaintop and say, Hashem, I love you, and so on. So there's not even a mandate for that. Of course, there's Abaydas Atfilah, but to make that an Iker, no, it doesn't exist. If you have time, open a Gemara, learn Gemara. Hashem gave us a time by davening that we can meditate and ponder the greatness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu and connect with. Of course, davening is meant to be a true connection, intimate connection with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But after davening, don't look for HaKadosh Baruch Hu on the mountain. He's in the Gemara. He's in the Tosfos. He's in the Halacha. That's where he is. Don't fabricate an idea that you're going to find him somewhere else. But when you learn Torah, of course, your consciousness is in the right place, and of course you're constantly connecting HaKadosh Baruch Hu with that type of connection, that depth of the connection which comes precisely through Torah. So of course you look at everything by the lens of Torah, and you'll be able to see and identify God in every reality, even out of the formal bracket of Torah, because Torah is called Torah. Torah is lichtikai. Torah opens the light, and when the light is open, you're able to see things so all around you in a different light. And and so too, of course, you're able to see the godly reality in the entire Olam Hazeh, but through the light of Torah. In today's class, Dr. Rebbe says, so I'm going to learn Torah. So I'm going to only learn Torah. Not I'm going to go find Hashem in my way and believe it. And of course, there's nothing there. The Rebbe has in the end of Lamed Zayin, it's just strong lotion. Lafuki, someone just Kira Abba Abba, just to call Abba Abba, Father Father. After now, Tabedis Hatfila, davening is not calling Abba Abba Hashem, calling Hashem like a ben kotna kera lavi, like a child wants to call his father. There he speaks about Midat Torah, but the idea is that say kach Abba Abba, that's not davening. Yeah, that's davening. When you're done with davening, you now go to the Gemara because that's where HaKadosh Baruch Hu is. Not to be tzayik Abba Abba just randomly. No, you want to know where Hashem is after you're davening. And not only that, there's something very unique about learning Torah right after davening, because you have that sensational connection with the HaKadosh Baruch Hu, now connected, anchored down with your limud Torah that says so many places in Sifrei Musa, Sifrei Chassidus. You have the great advantage of learning Torah right after davening. Your heart's on fire, connected, now anchored with limud Torah. So that's the mandate right after davening. And we should never fabricate our own way of connecting to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The whole phenomenon of connecting to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, of connection with the Almighty. There's one great novelty, so of course we have to do it exactly, precisely on His terms. But here the Alter Rebbe tells us today, he brings this idea that someone's going to say, okay, but the mandate, we do have a mandate to learn Torah. And we do know that the union which comes through Torah is greater than the union which comes through mitzvahs. The Alter Rebbe has it, famous 3 chapters. Hey, the 5th, 23rd, 37th. Take a look. Likutei Amarim. It's a click away. The infinitely greater type of union which comes through Limud Torah, even over Kiyum mitzvahs. Which again questions why do we stop from learning Torah and why do we do mitzvahs? Because the grander, we have to always look at the grander scheme. The Alter Rebbe says it's part of the Nisavakot, where HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted a dwelling place in this physical world. So of course, if from that perspective, of course we stop learning Torah to do a mitzvah which we cannot do through another party. We have to do it ourselves because we've done through another party. So you have both advantages. You're learning Torah, the mitzvah is implemented. But if a mitzvah cannot be done through someone else, only you can do the mitzvah, of course you'll stop to learn Torah. Even though, by definition, the union with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's like the difference of Gan Eden and Olam Hazeh. There's no greater, the Mishnah says, there's no greater tainug, pleasure, delight. There's nothing close to it. The whole Olam Hazeh, even a bumpy, a list, Olam Hazeh, which really doesn't exist. And a person only has only delight and pleasure in the entire lifestyle of his, but he's blessed by HaKadosh Baruch Hu in all areas of life. He's living a life of delight and pleasure. It doesn't come to one moment of a Gan Eden, the world to come. Yet the Mishnah says, the entire Chayil Mabah, Tshuva and good deed in this world is greater because here it's the Tainug Beire, it's the Tainug Creator, not the pleasure of creation. We once spoke about this. Created entities. No, it's the Tainug of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Nisavakot Baruch Hu, So similarly, of course, we stop learning Torah to do the mitzvah when it cannot be implemented through another party. Because the Eibishter wants us, a dwelling place for HaKadosh Baruch Hu in this world, but nonetheless, the union is greater than that. So a person is going to say, let some other people do and get involved in mitzvahs. I want to connect HaKadosh Baruch Hu with the Torah, and I know the union is greater. No, because he has to know that the main idea of Torah is the Achirayim of Torah. The fact that it's not that it sits, which is again even learning Torah in comparison to doing the mitzvah. You're going out of you, and now you're connecting to Olam Hazeh. You're doing that mitzvah. It's the Achirayim, the about face of the Pnimius, which Pnimius in comparison, mitzvahs comparison to Torah is Achirayim. Torah comparison to mitzvahs is the Pnimius. Delightful oneness of the HaKadosh Baruch Hu. No, it has to go out. We have to get involved in doing Hashem's mitzvahs. Which this is why Torah is the neil shel chachma shel amayla. It is which drips, it which comes out of the chachma, not the way chachma is one with its emanator, but the way it's navel is, it drips out and it comes and it connects to Elam Hazar Gashmi. That's the Charaim Teira. That's why Moshe Rabbeinu says what he says Chayra, because that's what the Moshe Rabbeinu's mandate was. That's what Teira is all about. It's Dafkan Elam Hazar Gashmi, Dafkan Elam HaMaisa. So this is what we were holding in 256 towards the end, probably about a quarter off the end of the page. The line begins in Chumrius, and there he goes on. The third word of the line, V'lachein devar Moshe Rabbeinu olav hashalom, Moshe Rabbeinu olav hashalom, shehi segad acheraim nechachma, that he perceived to be about face of chachma zochah shetinos l'alteira adiateira, which is again connected to the very beginning of the chapter, to where the Moshe Rabbeinu had a re'iyah in the Netzchai Yisei Malchus, which is all interconnected, but therefore he merited that the Torah would be given through him. What is Torah? Nevelas chachma shabbat. This which drips, the chitzein, it pours outwards. The Yachirayim, that's what Torah is all about. That is the Nevel Shel Chachma Shel Lamayla. What is Nevel? It means when it drips, Masher Nevel Mimeno V'Yer Lamata, where it pours from it or it drips from it, from the core of Torah, from the Chachmi Love HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But what is Torah? What is the whole idea of Torah? The message of Torah, the ideal idea of Torah, that the Nevel, which Nevel drips from it, V'Yer Lamata comes down. Oh, down here in this world, Mislavish B'Teira, Gash Mishalan, and invest in the physical Teira, our physical Teira. She'ikir B'Tachliso, Kima Mitzleisa, Sel Mitzvasir, B'Pel Ma'isa Mamash. What is the main idea? And then not only it comes down Lamato in this very physical world, but the main objective and goal is to fulfill Hashem's mitzvahs, to do them, to execute them. Loisas, and this Hashem says not to do. And this is what Hashem says to do, Ma'isa Mamash, because this is a world of action, not a world of meditation. Over Godel Talmud, maybe the greatest Talmud says the Mishnah. What I asked, if you remember, what is greater, learning or Ma'aseh? The Gemara says Talmud is greater. But you know why Talmud is greater? Because maybe the Ma'aseh, if you don't learn, you don't know. If you don't know, how could you do things right? You try, not necessarily getting it right. Person doesn't know halacha, doesn't learn Torah. You can do a lot of good things, and it could be as he's doing these good things, he's erring sometimes badly because you don't know. You don't know what's in Hashem in this very case. So even the Gemara speaks about the greatness of Talmud, but what is the greatness of Talmud? It brings Ma'aser, because that's what Torah is. Neuvel is Torah is Neuvel is Chachma Shel Maila. The Achirayim. That's what Moshe Rabbeinu was, but he says Achirayim. Moshe Rabbeinu's mandate was Torah, but he says Achirayim. To such a degree, someone learns Torah in order and not to do, he stipulates it. He says, I'm the Torah guy. I'm not getting involved in the action. Which means you're learning Torah, shaloi lasis, not to get involved in action. What does the Gemara say? Comes across very great, very strong. Noyach leishnapach shel yaseh. That it'd be preferable that your placenta, literally translated, would have been turned over. In other words, that you would fail to come into this world. You should have not been born to that degree. But really, you're talking about someone who learns Torah and appreciates Torah for what Torah really is. And he just doesn't want to get his hands involved in mitzvahs. He'll do it just minimally. Torah says that you're missing the point to that degree. The better if you would be born. Your shilya, your placenta will be turned over. You would never come into this world, because this is what Torah is all about. Torah is about action. Every person has to come down, reincarnate until he fulfills all the 613 mitzvahs. In actuality, like that Arizal writes. And of course, this itself you have to understand. There's so many mitzvahs which not even necessarily a positive idea. Down mitzvah of divorce. We have to come down to this world so many times to make this mitzvah of divorce. I don't know. Because divorce is a very sad thing. It's a terrible thing. Mizbeach me'edol b'mois, the altar cries when there's actual divorce. So there's a lot of explanation to this, and then there's, for example, certain mitzvahs which are related to melachim, kings. The melech has to write another separate Torah. It's not associated with the average person. So what does it mean? A person has to be reincarnated until he does all the mitzvahs? Everyone has to be a king one day? So many explanations on all this. At the end of the day, it has to be connected to all the mitzvahs, because this is what mitzvah is all about. And if you didn't do it right the first time, you have to be reincarnated to appreciate, to understand that Torah is about the execution of Torah in Ma'aseh B'Peh, in actuality, which is the idea of taking the cup and pouring it to another party. The Torah extends itself down here, lamata mata, in this very physical world, and encompasses the entire 24 hours, as we know. That's what Torah is all about. Torah tells us how to tie our shoes, to put on our shoes, how we put on our jacket. In every part of our life, Torah has a message. In other words, it's supposed to take apart every single nukuda, point of the Yid's life, and make its statement there. And not only the person, but the world becomes elevated through mitzvahs, because the significant majority of mitzvahs are with matters of Elam Hazar Gashmi. We gave the example to fill in tzitzis, wool, and sheep, and so on. That's what Torah is all about. Got to come down. Got to be executed in this very physical world. This is in Savakos Rachlis Lidira Batachtaim, in this lower world. That's the white Torah, the about face, the about the neiv. That's why it's connected to Torah, because Torah is about the achirai, meaning to say the chitzenis, the neivlis. This what comes down. It's not the experience of the remaining on high. It's the coming down. The whole idea of Torah coming down into Elam Hazah and making the imprint and the impact in Elam Hazah.